As global events become increasingly complex and interconnected, the role of journalists and independent media voices has become more significant than ever. This interview explores the changing media landscape, the challenges of covering geopolitical developments, and the responsibilities involved in analysing and interpreting international affairs. It also examines how independent journalism contributes to public discourse and the ways media professionals navigate credibility, influence and audience trust in a rapidly evolving information environment. Welcome to SOAP. I am Bahman Nuray. Patrick James Henningsen is a journalist, editor and geopolitical analyst known for his work in independent media and international affairs commentary. He is the founder and editor of the 21st Century Wire and has worked as a radio host, writer and public speaker focusing on global politics, media analysis and foreign policy. Through his reporting, broadcasting and editorial leadership, he has contributed to discussions on international relations, media narratives and the evolving role of independent journalism. Mr. Patrick James Henningsen, it's a pleasure to have you on SOAP.
Thank you for inviting me.
Lovely. And tell me, what was the very first moment, the very first inspiration for you to get interested in journalism and international affairs?
It's something that I came to pretty late in life and in my career, but I think it was unavoidable. A lot of us got drawn into the story about the Iraq War in 2003. I think it was pretty broadly across society at that time. I was in London at the time, and most people were against it, and they poured out into the street in opposition to it. But something happened in that the governments of the US and the UK didn't really take much notice in the end of the 2 million people in London and the millions more across America and Europe as well. And they went ahead with it anyway. And what struck me at that time was that why? How do they feel they have the consent of the public to take their countries to war that's clearly unpopular? How does this mechanism work? And of course, the media had a lot to do with it. And we saw how back then the newspapers dominated in 2003, as did broadcast television. It's a very different media landscape now, of course, being all digital and social media driven. But back then, it was like there needs to be more plurality of viewpoints. And at that time, blogging was starting to become a thing. In 2003, 2004, 2005. So I was doing something completely different in my life, business-wise and professionally, but I started blogging in my spare time. And I was becoming pretty good at it, getting a lot of views and being ranked high on some blog sites. And got involved in helping with documentary films, really through the activism route. And the Palestine issue was also very big at the time because London had a big Palestinian population and community, and I got to know them in my neighborhood, and they gave me really a crash course in Middle East geopolitics after the Second Intifada.
Well, staying with the Iraq topic, of course you've been trying to change the narrative on that. How successful do you rate your efforts at that?
I think, we weren't people who protested, and there were dissident journalists and media that created a counter narrative to the war narrative. Not successful, but over time, I've come to realize anyway that you can't win every battle, but you can win small victories, and collectively with all these independent media outlets, form a type of ragtag, motley armada of sorts in the media sphere, and do a lot of cooperation between media outlets, unofficial cooperation and helping to share and post and platform other people in podcasts and so forth, people whose views you find interesting, compelling. You may often agree with them, of course, So we've managed to, I think, collectively construct an alternative ecosystem in media that's actually outperforming mainstream in terms of the collective impressions, the collective engagement, if you will, for the issues that we're covering. So from that point of view, it's a long-term project. Transforming the way people think in society and globally. You have to you plant your seeds, you put the roots down, but it takes a while for those roots to spread and permeate. And I think through the culture, through the political economy, as well as the media. So the media is really a reflection of society and its values. And I think, for us as content creators, some people are called influencers. You have activists, you have journalists collectively. And I think if everybody is pursuing the truth, someone put it to me really a great way, which I'll never forget. He said, we need less democracy and more veritocracy. Veritocracy being governance based on what's true and the truth. So that's kind of a good thing to strive for.
Yes, indeed. An ideal to try to get as close as possible to. Well, of course, you mentioned blogging, and then you mentioned Iraq. And I thought of this documentary, Once Upon a Time in Iraq, and there was this character in it who was the Mosul Eye, or the Eye of Mosul. Your take on that, if you remember that character?
I'm not familiar with that specific instance.
The person that created so much hope for the people of Mosul, he was a guy living next door to Daesh terrorists or commanders, and he was inspiring hope for the people that stay together, stay united, we can overcome this. That was indeed an eye-opener, and no mistake in the words of Gandalf. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, in the case of people like citizen journalists or citizen activists, now they do have the tools to live stream, to go directly to the public and not have to go through big media institutions as a kind of intermediary. So, and you have potential for these types of stories. There's been many examples like that, I think, in a lot of situations. At the same time, it's now media more and more is also being regarded by, especially Western governments, but not exclusively, but as hybrid warfare. So they're including it as part of the, quote, battle space. And it's not just in the media. They're saying, no, what's going on between the ears of the public is the cognitive space. I'm quoting their own strategic documents. So in a way, the weaponization of media and the weaponization of information also creates this situation where maybe governments, the state, might view dissenting opinion as somehow a threat to, quote, national interests or national security. So now you have real information warfare, but it's not necessarily between, let's say, for example, the U.S. and Iran. It's between the U.S. government and its own citizens, or dissenting opinion within the Western sphere, the NATO sphere. And NATO and those types of institutions and collectively militaries and politicians are viewing that as a potential threat. But this is what always happens in history with empires, is they start regarding, they're looking for the enemy within, because there's no more dragons to slay or no more colonies to plunder externally. So now the threat is supposedly coming from within, but it's really just a way of calling dissenting opinion disinformation, as it were, or that sort of approach. So we're involved in that battle, as well as the battle for the truth, or to get the true geopolitical situation aired. We're also having to fight now against big tech.
But despite all of those efforts, such efforts, which is really, really precious, and I appreciate all of them a lot, we are still watching history repeating itself everywhere in different corners of the world. One thing is to try and create the effort. The other thing is trying to get the right feedbacks. How do you think was the feedback of the public? How much do you think you have raised public awareness in order to stop the same sort of parodies, same sort of troubles emerging and re-emerging again?
You know, that's not an easy thing. It's becoming more and more difficult. You know, you do have your subscribers, your followers. I'm talking about social media, and you do understand your core audience, and you can see how they're reacting or engaging through what they're sharing, through how the information promulgates. But that's even a very complicated equation to figure out now because of the use of bots, for instance, or AI-driven agents, not real accounts, not real followers. So how many of your hits or likes or shares are real versus bots? And not just for, you know, for us. I know some mainstream outlets that use bots, or well-funded outlets that actually use that to pump up their engagement, to give the impression of a widely held opinion. When
even state-funded bots. Yeah.
Absolutely, and corporate, state. And then, so how many of those, let's say, 1 million views are genuine views or genuine likes? And if it's maybe 300,000 are real and 700,000 are bots, then it's a bit distorted from the public's vantage point, because they're going to share and comment on things they believe are popular. And so then we have to, you know, really we really have to know who our audience is. And there's almost an act of faith. If you really believe that you have the truth and you've done the research and the due diligence, you have to have faith that your message, that your viewpoint is going to get across, even if it's to only 1/3 or 1/5 or 1/10 of that audience, that somehow that will create a cascading effect, that the truth will somehow resonate with people. I believe deeply that authenticity and the truth does resonate with people, and that's what matters. Is I'm going to try to present and to touch people and not AI bots. So again, less reliance on metrics, digital metrics, and continuing to focus on the principles of why you're doing it in the first place. That's about the best thing you can do in this very chaotic, digital, tech-driven environment.
Of course. And what motivated the creation of your own media platform?
Well, it really came out of necessity, because I was submitting articles to other journals, magazines, websites, and sometimes the editorial submission process can be tedious, lengthy, or sometimes you just get rejected, sometimes ignored. It's difficult. So I thought, well, this is now time for me to start my own blog, and with the help of some colleagues and friends and family, I was able to get up and running. And it's really developed into more than just a blog. It became a full-fledged media outlet after a few years. And we started growing quite rapidly. And then a major wave of censorship came in 2017 via Google. And I think it was the election of Donald Trump and the Russiagate affair, hoax, if you will. But that gave big tech in the US license to censor, and to do so with the full backing and support of the US government. And of course, any censorship that happens in the Silicon Valley has a global reach, because these are global platforms, even though the main pressure is coming from within the US. So anything that's invisible on YouTube because of a political situation in America or a foreign policy related situation, it's invisible globally, you see, and those are the #1 platforms. So, so I think we've been able to overcome a lot of this, you know, still owning your own website, controlling your content, not relying on big tech. Certainly that helped to save us through a lot of storms, but we're still trying to work with all these platforms, and I manage right now probably 7 or 8 channels, as well as our website, and also to try to make myself available to be on many other podcasts and shows.
Right, but at the time of the censorship, you know, tell me something. Of course, it must have affected the funding of your work.
Massively. So at that time, the main income source was ad revenue for banner ads on websites. And of course, that's based on traffic. Exactly. So as soon as you become delisted by Google for organic searches and your traffic drops 70%, we were getting between 700,000, 1 million unique visits per month, which was pretty good for a website our size. But with a 70% drop in traffic overnight, then our ad revenue dropped 70%. So you have to start laying off reporters and writers and people that were contributing to us. So,
and how did you overcome that challenge?
It's very difficult. It was very difficult. We had to find ways of being sustainable without relying on ad revenues and what they call CPMs, payouts per 1,000 impressions or 1,000,000 impressions. So, and the market has shifted away from that right now. So what we did was we got into subscriptions with memberships, but also sponsorships, affiliate sponsorships. I mean, we would just have to try anything. And then we'll also have to do a lot of work, and myself work for a number of different media outlets and clients. But I think through that adversity, we really learned a lot of resilience came out of that. It's not easy. It's not easy. You know, you could take political money. There's a lot of that available if you're, you know, aligned with one particular party or ideology. Certainly, a lot of the big names are relying on political money. But I wanted to try to avoid that at all costs, because I thought we have to be commercially viable, because then other independent media outlets can at least look at us and say, you can do it.
There is a model.
There's a model, and I think that's important. Even if it's not always successful, and even if it's too difficult, and you're going against market forces where, you know, the forces of cancellation would want to cut off your sponsor by contacting them and saying, why are you advertising on this website? You know, and that we had those types of issues through as well through advertisers. So,
and you managed to keep your media going despite all of that.
Managed to keep it going, just barely in some cases. It's, you know, there's a lot of reasons to not keep going, and a lot of our contemporaries are no longer there. You know,
I can imagine.
10, 15 years ago, a lot of the people that were our sort of, you know, colleagues, competition, or within our community, they're no longer there. And new people have come in, we're still there. And I think we've been very fortunate to be able to still do cutting-edge journalism, even through all of that adversity, and then being able to slowly rebuild again. And we've managed to also do that with cooperation with other, we say, our colleagues, our allies, as it were. And I think there's still a lot of support, mutual support. That's a big thing, and it's not always something that's visible. You know, it's really based on that you believe that you're on the same mission as this other media outlet. So you're going to help. I'm going to platform you. You're going to platform me,
yes.
And we'll help each other.
Yeah, to some extent you've answered my next question, but how does independent journalism differ from mainstream media in terms of priorities and approach?
This is a good question. Well, if you're smaller, we're able to do things that a big organization can't do. I'll give you a good metaphor. If you have an aircraft carrier at sea, to turn it around is a big operation. Or to turn it 90 degrees, there's a lot of staff involved. And so often such a big ship wouldn't want to turn 90 degrees. It might want to turn a little bit. And that's kind of like the institutional properties, if you will, or it's, you know, talking about an elephant moving rather than something more nimble and quick. As a small independent outlet, we're able to pivot. If there's an issue that comes on the horizon, like with Syria, we recognized very early on that there was this NGO called the White Helmets, which was getting all the mainstream coverage, but it was used as a real propaganda vehicle to justify sanctions and attacking Syria. And the more we dug into that particular issue, we were able to pivot a lot of our resources towards that one issue. And, or in the case of, let's say, you know, October 7th is an example where we pivoted all the way towards October 7th to expose what was going on, which looked like it was a genocide taking place. So we were able to do that as a small ship, battleship, and then all of our other colleagues who also had small battleships. Collectively, you're talking about 200 battleships, small ones, able to pivot and target one issue. And all we have to do is keep firing until we puncture the mainstream narrative on that. And once that's broken, the conversation rapidly changes, and you see trending issues change across social media, and all of a sudden, even the algorithmic suppression can't keep all of the content down, to the point where a platform like TikTok has to be bought out. Special interests or pro-Israeli interests, in this sense, the second richest man in the world has to pony up billions of dollars to buy the whole thing in order to change the content. And that's really a result of a lot of small independent outlets that were just focusing on a single issue. And then when that issue is no longer an issue, we will pivot to something else.
Right, and you mentioned two examples, Syria and Gaza. How did you find your right angle to those crises?
I think I think the angle, if you're doing good journalism and you're doing it in an inquisitive way, that angle presents itself, because the angle becomes a byproduct of your curiosity, and you're thinking there's more. There is a kind of an instinct where you think there's more here. I think a documentary filmmaker will have a similar experience when you set out to do a certain project, and you go and you inquire and you search and you dig and you pursue new answers, and new details arise that perhaps are more significant than
Just set an example. Can you tell me about your experience with Syria?
Syria was fascinating, but it was part of a trend that was going on. I got interested in Syria through the Libya issue. And because I started researching and writing and giving us a counter-narrative on what was happening in Libya during the so-called Arab Spring, which really wasn't an organic sort of phenomenon. There were Western governments, NGOs, even corporations that were behind some of the efforts of training and directing activists. And this has been exposed by a number of media outlets over the years, and journalists. And then you start to notice these signs in these places. You think, what we're watching here taking place in Libya is a much bigger operation than what it looks like. The same even in Egypt to some degree. There was foreign intervention. Yugoslavia, the same. And the same actors you see, NGOs backed by the U.S. State Department, by the National Endowment for Democracy, involved in the breakup of Yugoslavia, involved in the Arab Spring, involved in the breakup or the dirty war on Syria, as well as with recently with Iran. These Iranian human rights NGOs that are based in New York or Toronto, and these become the go-to sources. This is exactly what happened with Syria. Same formula. So if you study this over the years, color revolutions and destabilization, regime change operations, you start to notice the same playbook being used again and again. And you can very quickly see it. And a little bit of digging, you know where to look. You check the sources, the funding, the organizations, who's on the board. And then pretty soon you realize, okay, we know what we're looking at here. And you can move very quickly with the counter-narrative. Whereas the mainstream journalists will not take that kind of a risk, A, because it goes against the establishment, in this case in the United States, but also in NATO countries, but because it's a career-wise very risky, because maybe a mainstream journalist doesn't have the pedigree of studying regime change wars and destabilization efforts, 5 or 6 case studies over 15 years, but that's par for the course in our part of the media landscape. You have to know about these things. Whereas if you work for the New York Times, the Washington Post, that's not going to get you promoted, being an expert on those types of things. It won't get you access to the inner circles of power in the U.S., and your job really requires that access to keep your job if you're working for a major mainstream outlet in the U.S., where we don't have that level of access to be invited to intelligence briefings on, I'll give you an example, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So how valuable are these briefings at the end of the day? A lot of it is just theater for mainstream journalists to believe that they're getting the inside information from intelligence briefings in the U.S. And I would extend the same thing to U.S. congressmen on the intelligence committees and other people in British government or European governments. They think they're getting real intel, but they're not. So because we're not in that loop of influence and access per se. We're able to maybe approach it more academically, evidence-based, and then have analysis that goes with that.
But did you try to, I want to know, in your research, in your work on Syria as a case in point, what did you find the public's position to be on the turmoil the country was in? And did you get to influence that? Did you get to change that?
I think we did. We played a role, again, alongside others that were doing similar efforts. But I think we were able to, I think, get a truer picture that managed to, I think, counter a lot of mainstream propaganda that was really designed to delegitimize the so-called regime or the government in Damascus. And they did this through atrocity propaganda. They did it through sort of seeding narratives like, for instance, you'll be familiar with this narrative because this was used against Iran recently, which is that the leader is a brutal dictator. He is massacring his own people. Ergo, this justifies massive sanctions against them and maybe even a missile attack, which this was how the story was done in Syria, and that terrorists that were infiltrating Syria were moderate rebels, and they were just freedom-loving, democracy, pursuing the green shoots of the flourishing democratic impulses of the Syrian people. It wasn't that. These were Western-backed. Billions of dollars were used for weapons trafficking for various al-Qaeda affiliate groups. Even ISIS benefited from this as well. And those were specifically to destabilize and make the country ungovernable, and then soften it up for military attacks or subterfuge from within. And that's what ended up happening in December of 2024 with the collapse of Assad's government. So, but I think overall, that was an operation that was meant that government was meant to be toppled in 2013. And it took a lot longer because I think...
More than a decade longer.
15 years. It took, more than a decade from when they said, oh, Assad will fall within months. I remember the mainstream media. That was the party line, the media line back in early 2013. Didn't work out that way for various other reasons. Russia intervened in October 2015. And as well, I think the government and society was much more resilient in Syria than I think the West gave them credit for. They really thought, and I think the Arab Spring gave the West this idea that they could win on social media and with memes and Twitter waves, that somehow you could sweep away whole governments through these new digital tools. But that's not what happened. I mean, there were, I think, some change and success, and there were some genuine grassroots organic protests and definitely elements of organic and grassroots dissent within countries like Tunisia, for instance, Egypt, and others. But specifically with Syria and Libya, it was completely astroturfed, to use that term. It wasn't genuine at all, and a lot of it was distorted through very, very heavy propaganda narratives that were disseminated right across the Western media. So what we got in the West was a wall of I think, real fake news, real propaganda that was specifically deployed to change people's opinion, to justify sanctions, and of course military intervention in that case. And I think the same is true recently with how Iran has been characterized as well. So, and again, I give you a bunch of other examples of where this has happened. And it's if you know what you're looking for and you see the patterns, it's very easy to see when this type of massive multi-pronged attack, which is soft power, is hard power, military, soft power with media, and then smart power with NGOs. The combination of that is quite a formidable combination. So, we tried our best to educate people about
And how do you think the media narratives influence the public's understanding of global issues?
Well, I think the media narratives are essential I would say the more powerful countries, for a hegemonic power like the United States and NATO, which is an extension of the U.S. power, those narratives are essential. They cannot operate. You cannot operate as a world power, a hegemon. You can't dominate the world
Right.
without those narratives. You still need to give the impression that you have the people's consent, the people's support for what you're doing and what the trillions of dollars you're spending overseas. You need to make a narrative to justify that somehow this is a battle for preserving democracy. This is a battle of good versus evil. It's really the Crusades, but for the 21st century, but repackaged for 21st century ideological or cultural or civilizational issues that would have been basically the Crusades of 1,000 years ago. It's pretty much the same great game.
And of course, I assume you continue your reporting after these collapses, after these invasions and everything. Do you get the sort of feedback that says that, oh, you were right? Often,
yes. Often we've been right, and it's been acknowledged. We've been wrong as well, but you have to take risks sometimes in predicting because, and I learned this when I studied international relations. I went back to school very late to get a master's degree in international relations, and the whole point of international relations is being able to predict the behavior of states, and that's where the currency is, and that's why so much has been put into areas of diplomacy in modern history, especially because it's in the interest of the governments and all of their businesses and their political class and so forth to be able to predict what other countries are going to do next. And you can do that through an understanding of certain principles of international relations and certain realities, or realism as a school of thought, that the people in countries are going to behave pretty predictably if certain factors are in place. But if you're ignoring these factors, you have a very difficult time seeing what's actually happening and what's going to happen. And so for the United States, those narratives kind of hold in place the facade, if you will, that it is a benevolent hegemon that's really a liberal democratic custodian globally of liberal democracy. And that's kind of been the position after the Second World War for a US-led internationalist world order, liberal internationalist world order. Now you can see this is starting to disintegrate right now, which is creating a lot of instability in the international system. And this is the big challenge right now. It's a big challenge for journalists, for media. We're used to some level of predictability in terms of how states are going to react in certain situations and how countries will come in to try to cool down a situation. We're in a very strange and unusual environment where a lot of those checks and safety valves are no longer there. We're talking about the Trump administration specifically has basically changed the way I think people are looking at this now, and not in a good way. It's very stressful and very worrying for a lot of countries that might be on the receiving end of not just tariff wars or even sanctions, but hard military power, or even having your president abducted and taken to a kangaroo court in New York. I mean, when has this ever been even something the U.S. would do so brazenly? They didn't before. They'd always worked through multilateral institutions.
You're an expert of international relations. You've studied it. Tell me something, and the term peace by force, which is on the rage nowadays, where do you see that in line? With what theory? Do you think it's an extension of the brutal side of realism again, or where do you see that?
That is, peace through strength. And this is what President Trump and his inner circle, his support base will say. This is a president who believes in peace through strength, and this is the only solution to world peace. Well, I mean, it leads to war. I think we've seen quite a bit of that over the last year. in the first year of this administration, his second term as president. And it is, I think, the Hobbesian state of nature of extreme realist thought. But if the intention is to destabilize, is to show your strength by destabilizing, to prove to the world that you are stronger and you have powers and capabilities and you're willing to use those in your own interests, but the result is destabilization and chaos, then all of a sudden even international relations theory, or IR theory as they call it begins to fold in on itself, because you're risking even the stability of having the discourse in the first place, and having a civilized world where you can even debate these things. That also comes at risk. And then, you have the issue of the fact that the difference between 1945 and 2026, or 27, 28, 2030, is that we have so many nuclear-armed countries in the world. That didn't exist before. Inherently, things are more dangerous if escalation is allowed to go sort of unchecked. And you don't know what could happen in terms of action-reaction. Much more dangerous. And we're also dangerous in the sense that a lot of the experts in the Cold War, all of these realists like John Mearsheimer and his contemporaries, they came out of a bipolar world order, the Cold War. This is why they're all prominent commentators right now, because they understand great power politics. But it was out of the Cold War, with the United States and the USSR being the two main superpowers, right, the two main nuclear rivals, nuclear weapons rivals. So things were easy to sort of put into, the two ultimate strengths canceled each other out, and you had mutually assured destruction. That kind of made sense in the theoretical world of international relations and power politics and military studies. But that's not what we have today. It's much more risky, much more dangerous, much more complicated today. So even those great minds of the 20th century, they can't very easily say what is the best course of action here, other than if multiple countries got together to disarm nuclear in terms of the nuclear weapons. But if everyone doesn't disarm and one is left with nuclear weapons, then of course you have a huge problem there as well. And so, I mean, the world's changed. The bottom line is the world has changed. And also geopolitics is different. China is no longer a third world country. It was before. India is a rising superpower. You have civilizational states like Iran, like India, like Russia, that are, emerging and sort of claiming their legitimacy and credibility as a civilizational state in the 21st century. And that wasn't the case, 100 years ago, 70, 80 years ago. It was a very different environment globally. And now we're in a real post-colonial environment. And so I don't think people in governments and decision-making foreign policy positions, they're not necessarily all equipped to deal with this at the moment. Some are. But if you look at the European Union, for instance, the types of rhetoric you hear from Brussels in terms of foreign policy, it's not very inspiring. It doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. And I think it's just because whatever, a competent class of diplomats and statesmen and people who really understand and can execute meaningful statecraft to avoid these terrible situations. There's a shortage, I think, of these people within the current modern political ranks in the West. Not necessarily in the East as much, but in the West there is. That's a big risk. And so to fill in the gaps of understanding and that sort of gulf of how people are being able to conceptualize and understand what's actually going on, that's where media and journalism plays a really important role.
The other thing is, of course, educating your audience. How do you inspire your audience to develop stronger media literacy in analyzing, in reading the news or following the news?
It's very difficult because you know, it's very easy to promulgate real fake news now. And it's very hard for some people to tell the difference between what's real, what's not, especially with image generation now. That's a big problem too. So the media literacy just got a lot more difficult because of a lot of the tools that are now ubiquitous. And of course the risk is that governments will want to use this as an excuse to further restrict speech and perhaps access to platforms and require all sorts of other hoops to jump through in terms of verification, validation, or a license to publish, for instance, through a digital ID system. Who knows what shape this is eventually going to take, but before media literacy was much easier, you know, with mainstream broadcasters, even with a few big websites that were doing the lion's share of the traffic. You could kind of navigate that or teach someone how to navigate that. This is left wing, that's right wing. This is more anti-imperialist here. This is more Marxist here. This is more sort of global, transnational, corporate-driven, libertarian, free market kind of viewpoint. This is an oligarch who owns that. He's got a specific interest. It was very, you could figure out what the angle was from all of these different media outlets and then do your sort of triangulation of the issue. But now it's a lot more difficult because people are buying up whole platforms. You have a billionaire class that can literally scoop up massive television networks, huge social media platforms.
They're realizing the worth of those networks.
They are, and they're using them to push an agenda, and sometimes it's a social engineering agenda, but on the back end of that social engineering agenda are real business interests, monopoly interests, the cartels of companies that are working together, especially in the tech and the AI sector, the Palantirs of the world, the Elon Musks of the world. Their goal is consolidation, it's monopolization, and they're able to use politics in order to pave the way towards those objectives. And it's very hard for the average person to see this and really understand what is going on. It looks like, oh, they're just a champion of free speech. They bought this platform because they want to free the people. But there's a whole agenda behind that. And we're starting to see what that actually looks like now. And so
you think there is a possibility that we are entering a world or a realm where a non-state actor can become hegemony? Absolutely.
That's such an important point you're bringing up, because that non-state actor, and non-state, that's the key word, non-state, that the hegemon is not going to be a nation state in the traditional sense, but a corporate hegemon, or areas of corporate, let's say, deregulated zones, and I'm talking countries. Because you have people that are wealthy enough right now, the wealth gap is such that the trillionaire class, we're not far. There's already one or two. The trillionaire class can buy up whole countries. Or in the case of Argentina, there's now issues of whole ports being sold off as free economic zones, islands in Honduras, and Peter Thiel and all of the titans of tech and Bilderberg members, they're heavily invested in a lot of these ventures. And this is to basically supersede state or democratic governance with corporate governance, replace the UN with the Board of Peace, which is a private interest as well, billionaire funded in perpetuity. And so they control, they make the decisions. So the people enter into a contract with the corporation rather than as constituents within a representative democracy. This is where the elite class are definitely moving their capital. Greenland is another example of that. So why are all these billionaires so interested? It's not just because of the rare earth minerals there or controlling the resources. There's more, I think, at play. So now we're taking us back to the, the age of the city-states, 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. And now the corporate city-states in the 21st century, driven by AI data centers with the fusion of technology and social engineering. Is their view of the new world order is a very different corporate world order.
Well, it's really beautiful the way that you get to connect the dots between the past, present, and also the future while analyzing different global crises. So what role do you think historical context play in that type of analysis?
I think if you look back at history, you can see successes, what worked for those in power, and you also can see how it failed and why it failed. And you can somewhat transpose some of these same principles in the present day. History can provide you with a template, not a blueprint, just a type of a template. But it's not going to be exact. But what that's your job as an analyst or an academic or a historian or political scientist, to look at that and compare the two and say, well, this is likely to succeed or that's likely to fail, and here's why. This is what you'll gain from this transition, this new world order, and this is what you're going to lose. Is what you're going to lose worth it? We can look at history where there could be some serious human costs, or in terms of people losing their rights, or wars that break out, or games between powerful interests that end up in a complete apocalypse. That's also a possibility. So one has to look at that and try to draw some lessons from that, and to realize, because listen, to people who are positioning their assets to make these sort of major consolidation moves, they understand a lot about history too, and they've studied it, and they're prepared to do what it takes to make sure that their system is going to be the one that wins in the end. So we also have to do our work as members of the public and citizens and journalists, to try to understand what's motivating them and why, because it may or may not be, and often it's not going to be in everybody's best interests. But we're in very interesting times right now, and very perilous times in many ways, and we have to engage as much as possible on these issues, even though they seem very difficult and almost overwhelming at times. And the amount of information that's flooding in that we're expected to understand and consume and to somehow make sense of all this, it is overwhelming sometimes. We have to do our best to put what we can in perspective, and hope that people can learn what they need to learn and draw the conclusions that are going to make a difference.
Well, Patrick, I really enjoyed this conversation. We have a tradition at the end of every program. Our guests have a minute or two, as much as they want, to talk directly to the camera right behind me, directly to your audience. So as of this moment, my audience becomes yours. So share whatever you want with them.
I don't really have much more to share in this sense, other than we're really grateful to have been invited to talk on this program, and some of the media opportunities that we've been able to have while we've been visiting in this country. I think it's been very enlightening, very revealing as well, and also very encouraging that you have a vibrant and dynamic media space that's very much alive and well in the Islamic Republic of Iran at the moment, which I think has a lot to share and has a lot to say in the world. So we look forward to more of it.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Patrick James Henningsen. Always a pleasure to have you on SOAP. It was indeed an amazing conversation for me.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And our lovely viewers, thank you so much for staying with us on another SOAP. Remember, you can be part of the conversation. Use our social media handles you can see on your screen right now. And until another SOAP, it's goodbye from me, Bahman Rai.